Welcome to Lone Star Chronicles, From Legacies to New Frontiers. I'm your host, Brian Naples, inviting you to join me in exploring the histories and technologies that shaped our past and guide our future. Thank you for joining me on this epic journey. Stay tuned. Well, Bill O'Neal, welcome back to the show.
Brian, I'm delighted to be back. It was such fun last week, and I'm looking forward to a few more months of these podcasts.
I have some news for you.
Okay.
So I went home the other week and I Googled you and I was trying to find out some information. I didn't just Google you. I chat GPT'd you. I went into AI and I said, give me some information on Bill O'Neal. I need to know about his book so I can do this podcast. And it came back and it told me that you were dead.
Of course, if I were a Catholic priest, yes, and you have a brother who is, I would say, requiescat in pace.
Well, the Chat GPT said that you died in 1993.
Is that right?
I don't know where it came up with that date.
93. When I was 51 years old. 30 years ago.
Maybe it knows something that we don't.
No, maybe not.
So hopefully it doesn't catch up with you anytime soon. That's for sure. Yeah, I got the biggest kick out of that when I saw that. I said I got to talk to Bill and tell him that he's...
There was a Presbyterian minister in Longview for many years named Bill O'Neal, same spelling and everything. And we used to get mail, and we bumped into each other, and he retired or something, or perhaps away in 93. I don't know. But anyway, he was a good guy, and I came off ahead in those when they would compare me to him. I thought, oh, good, preacher.
That's funny. Well, I wanted to continue our conversation this week and talk to you about the frontier in Texas, because that's the theme of the show, is the frontier. So I figured, I'm starting to become a Bill O'Neal aficionado, by the way. I've got a bunch of your books now.
That's wonderful.
I'm going to start I'm going through all of them.
I think you should read every one of them cover to cover.
Well, I'm going to do my best. You've written so many books. I don't know if I can do it all anytime soon, but I'm working my way through them. And so I'm looking at you wrote a whole series on the West.
Yes.
All right. Particularly Texas. You focused heavily on Texas, and the Texas frontier really is a unique thing to study. And so I really wanted to get your idea of what makes the frontier the frontier. Why is Texas, of all places, Texas is still kind of associated with the frontier? Like when people think of frontier lands, we still talk about Texas. And, if you go through a lot of your history books, government books, and different liberal arts books, they bring up Texas when they talk about the frontier. And not just Texas, I should note, right? Because you do have a swath of land from Texas, basically from Texas to California. You got that lower swath of land. And I guess maybe part of the thing is that it's kind of a barren land.
Yeah.
And I think that's what continues that.
That's correct.
So
but here in East Texas, we started out as a frontier.
Yes.
We had been under the flag of Spain for about 3 centuries. The Spanish first crept up from the south into Texas with a mapping expedition in 1519.
Yeah.
And that's when recorded history of Texas begins. And so we became Spanish. Of course, Columbus had arrived only a couple of decades earlier.
Yeah, not that
under the flag of Spain.
Right.
And so we fell into the under the flag of Spain because we were the northernmost part of the Spanish Empire. They came up from Mexico.
That's right.
And they decided to see what they had up here. And they explored around, and there were wonderful explorations for many years. They poked around all over the place. In East Texas, where we are, the ace explorer was a guy named Alonso de Leon, and he made 5 journeys of exploration throughout East Texas. But they were all over the place. There was a guy that liked to come in from the west, and he would come in from New Mexico. And he was all over West Texas, and so they everywhere they went they claimed, and they say 6 flags over Texas, but that's the principal flag before we
300 years, as you said, And
centuries.
France does make a little bit of an attempt.
And little. It wasn't much.
No, it wasn't much at all.
And nor was it long lasting.
Yeah,
but that makes a
handful of
good
years.
Six Flags of Texas. That's fine.
Well, and one of the things that I find interesting is that Texas is kind of a land bridge, right? So if you look at it geographically from here's Spain, they come in and they're really kind of coming up, as you said. Fast forward several years, but when the English, or really by this time the Americans, when the Americans start coming in, they're coming in, from the east and through the west, and in order to go south, you got to go through Texas.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And so you get this meeting. You have of course all of the indigenous nations. They're all mixed in here too.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
And so many, like, what were there? They say 100 different nations at some point in time. I've looked up some of the history.
Hard
on
to
that.
call them a nation because
that's
they
true.
weren't that well organized.
That's
Nevertheless,
Right.
they're tribes, if you will.
Yeah, at least 100 different tribes, and so
All kinds. There were the cannibals. The Karankawas.
I was always wondering
and the
if I could pronounce the name.
Tonkawas.
Yes, right. And so you get this massive assimilation, not assimilation really at the moment. It's more of a meeting, right, that takes place right here in Texas. And I think that's one of the things that contributes to the rich history of the state is that it really is a meeting ground.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
And you see that with the Caddo, right? Even just the name Texas.
Yeah, right.
Friendship state.
Texas.
Yeah, Texas.
That's how they said it.
So
Yeah, but here's kind of what happened. The Spanish, after 3 centuries now, we get to the early 1800s. They've been in charge for 3 centuries. They did not have the gift of settling a frontier as we did. And so after 3 centuries, there were 3 towns. There was Nacogdoches, population 500. Well, that's smaller than Beckville, if you will. Okay, another town of 500 was around the mission complex at Goliad because it was a mission, but they also had a fortress, there. Okay, and so they had 500. Now that's 2 500 500 population settlements, and the only other one. The only other thing we had that was not just a village was San Antonio. And San Antonio was the capital, the Spanish capital of Texas, and it had 1,500 people. And that was it.
We're not talking a lot of people here.
That's right. That's right. And so as there began to be pressure, the Mexican population began to threaten revolution. And then here we came, we were knocking at the doors. I mean the American frontiersman who was always moving west.
Yeah, always.
And they decided we've got to do something.
Yeah.
And so they decided that very boldly they would open Texas to us. And we were the ones who were so acquisitive.
I know, right? And
but their idea was that if we let them in and give them a really big chunk of land, then these settlers will become loyal Spanish citizens.
Yeah.
And so they did, and they gave us over 4,000 acres of land. If you said you were going to be a farmer and a stock raiser, then you got over 4,000 acres of land. My great-grandfather, who came into Shelby County as a miller in 1835, he had 4,000 something acres of land, a league and a little border, and everybody had that. And it didn't work out the way they wanted to. We came in, boy.
But we didn't stop coming in.
That's
there
right.
Was
We didn't stop.
Flow.
Here we came. And thus, the Americans came in. And, if you come into East Texas, you still got a long way to go. While I was state historian twice, I made the trip out to El Paso. And actually, I worked my way out each time. I would stop here. One of those trips was 8 days long. I didn't just fly out there.
Right.
I would arrange other meetings and stuff on the way. And I think both times it was an 8-day trek. 8 days, man, to the other side of the state.
Golly.
800 miles.
That's a long trek.
Now, I could have made it fast. Coming back, I made it in 2 days.
Right.
But nevertheless, it was a long way out. And, boy, changes of terrain and stuff. And all different kinds of, I wrote, one of my recent books is about Rip Ford a legendary Texas Ranger and basically a warrior for Texas. And Rip was out there. He blazed a trail toward California in the 49er thing. He blazed a trail that went all the way to El Paso through the Big Bend country and everything. And it was harsh land, and there were Comanches out there, Comanche war trails going down into Mexico. And we just thought the Indians in East Texas had been rough opponents.
Oh, yeah.
My goodness, we came up against those Comanches, and Kiowas, the mounted Indians. And so we had struggles with these. It was customary, well, not customary, I mean, it just happened, that whenever we would go into a new state, there would be a decade or two of hostilities between these acquisitive settlers and the people who already lived there, the Native Americans.
Yeah.
And after a decade or two, we would wind up conquering them. We were good at that. I mean, that was one of our assets as pioneers. And so a decade or two, okay, wait a minute. When the settlers came into Texas in the early 1800s, they had trouble with Indians in the 1820s.
Right.
Under Stephen F. Austin and stuff, and that's when the Texas Rangers got started. 1820s.
Right.
1830s. 1840s. 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, and the last fight was way out in West Texas in the early 1880s in that barren country. And so we covered some 7 decades, more than 6 anyway, and the usual pattern was a decade or two. And in Texas, we had these troubles with all of these Indians who did not want to be displaced.
Oh, yeah.
And they fought very well.
Yeah.
But our guys did too. That's the thing we have to remember. Our guys also fought. We were very aggressive settlers. And, we were born frontiersmen. At least the people who came west did that.
Yeah.
I've just finished a book, which you've seen, on Miles City, Montana. And Miles City was settled in the wake of the Custer Massacre. But here was the thing. Miles City it was nothing, absolutely nothing until the military built a fort out there. Then they had customers for saloons and ladies and other forms of nightlife. Okay, that's great. But here are these guys coming in to build a town. Yes, it was a rough experience. At one point, they said, well, we have 23 saloons now, and there's talk of building a church.
We might build a church.
We're talking about it. We're thinking about it. And the thing was, these guys were urban pioneers. Yeah. So when we think of pioneers, we think of the settlers in the covered wagons with their, and that's how my grandmother came to Texas, incidentally, in 1881 as a child. Yeah. And a wagon train of 20-some-odd wagons from Mississippi. So those were pioneers, and the cowboy is certainly a pioneer, and the mountain men, my goodness, are they pioneers?
Oh, man.
Golly, Pete. Yeah. And there are all kinds of pioneers, but capping it off is the urban pioneer. The urban pioneer is the guy who comes in and builds the saloon or hotel or a parlor house for ladies or a general store. Right. Or he comes in an experienced journalist, and he comes in and starts a newspaper. And if he's good, and if this town works, and some of them didn't, some of them just fell flat on their face, but if this town works as Miles City did, then all of a sudden he is one of the early leading citizens. He's got the first newspaper. He teaches school. He's a lawyer. He's got to have attorneys. Yeah. And so forth. And so consequently, the urban pioneers come in and wind up building a town, a Nacogdoches, if you will. Yeah. And that's great. But they are urban pioneers. They are the members of the urban frontier. And it has a totally different meaning than the guys back east who just take over their father's business. You know,
that's so funny. I've never given much thought to the urban pioneer in that way, right? Yeah. So, I've always considered the pioneer. I've always thought of it mostly in terms of, well, you got your farmers and your mountain men that go out, they're going to, conquer the land and so forth. But like the person that comes in and actually tries to create the first put up the first building, put up the first business
Yeah.
in place. That's a whole new challenge.
You bet. And there were urban pioneers aplenty, and people who trace their lineage go back to some urban pioneer. And the thing is, these guys are different.
Yeah.
They had the same sense of adventure that brought the mountain man out, that brought the cowboy out, the pioneer farmer.
Yeah.
They had that same sense of adventure, and they knew they were starting something. And they were not easily cowed by war parties,
Right.
or gangs of outlaws. I used to just hoot when I watched those televised westerns, and there would be some outlaw or an outlaw with 2 or 3 in a gang or something, and he'd come in and he would cow the town. I'm sorry. Those guys who came in and tried to take over a town, he's dealing with urban pioneers. He's not dealing with guys back east who are running the general store.
Right.
He's dealing with guys they'd leave those guys strung up.
Well, they had to police their own stores, right?
That's
They had to
right.
police their own stores.
You
They had
bet.
to, that's one of the things I find interesting about the frontier is that you don't have a centralized system in place. Justice system. You might have like a local sheriff, that comes in, but for the most part, many of these people, when they're out on the frontier, right, or they're starting these businesses, they're on their own as far as defending their own property or defending their own establishment.
And they didn't blink when they had to kill somebody.
Yeah.
And then no grand jury is going.
There's going to be
the grand jury is made up of everybody like me, and so they say, self-defense.
Yeah, and that's it. And
They lynched a guy in Carthage. We'll talk about it sometime.
Okay.
They lynched a deputy sheriff in Carthage who had killed the county treasurer.
My gosh.
And robbed the safe. The only safe in Carthage in 1888. We didn't have any banks or anything. Well, they found out who it was after a couple of weeks.
Uh-huh.
And they lynched the guy on the square.
Oh, my goodness.
And so then they came up with a coroner's jury, which frequently wasn't but 3 guys.
Right.
Well, they had a gang of about 300 in the lynch mob. The population of the town wasn't but 400, and that's everybody, women and kids. And so these were all guys from the countryside. They knew what was coming.
People coming in.
And they were there that night. And listen, there wasn't any of this stuff about these heroic jailers defending some bum who just murdered somebody.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't. These were their friends and neighbors who were coming to get him, and here's the keys.
Well, and you're familiar. I'm sure you're familiar with Noah Smithwick.
Sure.
And his work, The Evolution of a State.
Yeah.
And I find his work fascinating.
I do too.
I've read his book a couple times.
Let us mention he goes back to the 1830s.
Yes.
He is a very early settler. He knew everybody like Stephen F. Austin and stuff.
He came in.
And he had the mental attitude of the of the pioneer period.
He did. And he came in. I wanted to say he might have come in around 1829 or something.
20s.
Something like that. But then
yeah.
he fought in the Texas Revolution.
Right.
Fights the Mexican-American War, 1848.
Yeah.
And he doesn't leave Texas until he leaves Texas, I think, after when the Civil War breaks out. He finally leaves. And then, of course, he doesn't pass away until about almost 1900. And then he writes the book.
Yeah. I think he was blind by then. He dictated it, did he not, to his granddaughter?
He did. He dictated the book to his
Evolution
granddaughter.
of a State. Classic book.
But what made me think of it is exactly what you're saying. Noah Smithwick says exactly in the book what you're saying about the old Western frontiers and the way that justice was handled. I mean, it's exactly what he says. He says a lot of these guys, they're out on their own. There isn't, and he actually says that was one of the problems with Texas when it was first formed. You get 1836. Okay, we break from Mexico. We become an independent nation. And he said one of the reasons nobody has any trust in the government and why Texas struggled as an independent nation is even though you're a country, he said everything was still justice and the systems, everything was still run so locally.
Yeah, it was.
So the state would come out with laws. Well, that didn't mean much.
Yeah, those guys.
Because the state didn't have any way of enforcing its laws.
Well, here was the thing. First of all, executions were handled on a countywide basis, you were hung at the courthouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the old courthouses still have a trap door in the second floor.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. But in any event, I mentioned the coroner's jury in the case of this lynching of all these hundreds of guys. Well, they came up with a few. There's not anything in the records here, because what happened was the coroner's jury came in and saw this guy. They made him climb a tree, the square-head trees, and the guy had a noose around his neck already. And he said, "Well, I'll jump off." And they said, "Okay, we're ready." And he jumped off, hung himself in effect.
Oh, wow.
And so he's just swaying in the breeze there, and the crowd disperses. So the first thing the next morning, they come up with a coroner's jury. Well, any 3 or 6 guys or whatever that they had appointed to the coroner's jury had been there. All the guys in town were there.
Yeah, everyone was there.
And they came by, and with a straight face, they ruled that he committed suicide. He jumped off and hung himself, and that was it, a suicide. No further legal action. There's no legal documents about it. And they did that kind of thing all the time. They thus excused themselves. And
Wow.
As we got into the post-Civil War period, there's lots of outlawry, Sam Bass and those kind of guys and everything.
Right.
And one of the problems was we only had one state penitentiary, and that was at Huntsville.
Yeah.
And they finally decided we got to get a little bit more, a little more jail room here, because we got a lot more bad guys than we do cells. And they built the second prison in Texas, the state prison over in Rusk, and you can still go over there and see this huge cell block. Now the walls,
oh wow, it's
and
still
stuff,
there.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's built like a fort.
Oh, I'm sure.
You're gonna have to have a nuclear explosion to get that thing down. And a guy I wrote a book about was prisoned over there, and I have a picture of it in my book. But I mean, you can just drive over there now. I always used to take my Texas history classes. We would take a journey over to Rusk, but on the way we would swing by that second prison. And then later on, they began to get more state prisons, taking some of the burden off of the counties.
Right, yes.
And thus, when they would have a legal hanging, as they did with the murderer Bill Longley, who probably murdered about 5 guys.
Yeah.
And they called him Bloody Bill Longley or Wild Bill Longley. And when they hanged Longley, they did it in Giddings because that was the county seat. And there was a crowd of it was just a small village of so many hundred.
Right.
But a crowd of 2,000 came to see this event.
Wow.
And they had their children there and everything.
Golly.
And they marched Bill up, and he said a few final words, and they sprung the trap door. And they hadn't really fastened the rope well. And he goes all the way down to his knees. And not worried about double jeopardy. They put the gun on him, and he goes limping back up the steps
with the
hood still over his face.
Oh, my gosh.
And they secured the knot this time and hung him a second time, and the crowd was very gratified. They had seen a very good show, And
Golly.
so
it's almost like you can't make this stuff up.
No, that's right. That's right. It's true. I'm working on a book right now with a bunch of stuff like that in it, and they just were, the bad guys. Whatever happens to the bad guys, that's their tough deal.
Yeah,
of course they had all kinds of lynchings because we were such a cattleman's paradise.
Yeah,
we had open range ranching for years, and that meant there was a lot of rustling that went on. It was too easy. There were no fences.
No fences.
And boy, they'd catch those guys and they'd string them up right there on the spot.
Yeah, I've heard that the eventual invention of barbed wire really changed the state of Texas.
It certainly did.
Because of the it prevented that rustling, or a lot of it. It didn't perfectly prevent it, but it really changed how cattle were handled.
Yeah. Gotta tell you a great story. When the XIT was formed to build the state capitol, and the state allotted 3 million acres of prime cattle land, and it was so many miles, it was 8 miles wide or 12. It was a zigzag width, but the depth was started in the corner of the Panhandle and went down 200 miles down the New Mexico line. 200 miles. Can you imagine? You and I are sitting here in Carthage, Texas, and 200 miles is Fort Worth.
Yes,
and that's how long.
That is.
That ranch was.
Man.
Well, what I was going to tell you is when they divided that ranch into at first 8 divisions, and then within each division was a gigantic horse pasture and this and that and so forth. And as they shipped in carloads of wire, it took 6,000 miles of barbed wire to fence in that ranch. Now get this:
Golly.
you have to have a lot of gates.
Yes, you do have to have a lot of gates.
And it was, it was their ranch. They didn't want to impede transportation.
Right, they need to go in and out.
One railroad car came in loaded with all hinges. A railroad car of hinges. And then another railroad car came in with all wire staples. You got to staple.
Yeah, you got to staple the fence
I think they bought 100,000 fence posts. And now how are you going to?
How many railroad cars brought all of those in? I'm sure quite a few.
They spent $181,000 on railroad cars of these kinds of materials.
In today's terms, that was got to be
a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Their eventual goal was to sell it off to settlers.
Yeah.
But the settlers hadn't gotten out there yet.
Yeah.
And so this was right in the middle of the beef bonanza, and so they ran the nation's largest ranch that was owned by someone, not just appropriated.
So let me ask you, in the little bit of time that we have left, let me ask you about the geographical circumstances out there. West Texas, you got the high and dry plains.
Yes.
Yes. You go down a little bit further down to Austin, you get a little bit of the hill country.
Oh yeah. The Balcones Escarpment created the hill country.
Yes. And
my mother was raised in that area.
Oh really? Yeah. The hill country. Of course, here in East Texas, piney woods and everything. Yeah. But what I find fascinating about geography of the state of Texas that makes it really rough and tumble, is when we talked a little bit about last week with the water supply. There's very little water supply coming in, so your settlements are really going to all have to work around where that water availability is.
Yes, indeed.
And that's not easy, to work out, right?
Well, as you probably know, there's only one natural lake in Texas, and that's Caddo Lake.
Caddo Lake. Yeah.
Only natural lake in the whole state. We got lakes everywhere, but they're all man-made.
Yeah. And everyone's always told me that I've had some people go, that was started by a beaver dam. That's not natural. What is a beaver's natural, right?
Yeah, it's pretty natural.
It's pretty natural.
Natural looking guy to me.
That's what people have told me anyway. I don't know the whole history behind the lake. But so when settlers are coming in, there's a foraging. You can almost say that there's a certain amount of foraging that has to be done for the settlers to come in. You don't have sawmills, so you have to build your infrastructure to build the sawmills, to cut the wood, right? You have
May I mention here, I'll interject,
Yeah.
my first relative to come into Texas was on my mother's side, and he came in with a growing family to Shelby County in 1835, and we're, about to enter our Republic of Texas phase, and he's the one that got the 4,000 acres. But he didn't need 4,000 acres. What he needed was a stream with which he could build a mill. He was a miller, and so he came in to Shelby County, and there is a place called Mill Creek. It flows into the city lake, but it was outside of Shelbyville, which was the only town in the county seat. And he built. There's nothing left of it today because it was built of logs and all that's gone. But he built a mill, and he milled there, the first mill in Shelby County. He did that for about 20 years, and then he's got that old pioneer thing. It's time to go west. Yeah. I know I'm middle-aged now, but I just got to go west.
Got the itch.
And he and a son-in-law got their families, and they transplanted themselves to the hill country. They went to Williamson County, where, they went out there as they were just in the wilderness. And near the community of today of Liberty Hill. They used to call me, when I was a kid, they used to call me Wild Bill from Liberty Hill. So we were from that general area. And so he built yet another, he's middle-aged now.
Yeah.
But he built another mill, and he built this one of stone. And until recently, when they did some bridge work, you could still see the remains of the second mill. So that's what he did. He had been a miller back east where he had come from. Now he comes to Shelby County and builds a mill, the first mill in the county. Mm-hmm. And then later on, he's got the itch, and so he heads west and does his pioneer thing one more time. Those guys loved seeing a new frontier.
Yes.
And even if all you're doing is building a mill or something, hey, that's a frontier enterprise.
Yes.
And now a community can grow around that mill.
Yeah, that's where I was going. I was going to say with the mill, you got the water supply, the building of the wells. And, of course, wood mills, of course, need the water, right? Because they have all these water saws. That's how they work.
And if you've got all this stuff, you got families. Don't you need a school?
You do need a school.
Well, where's the school marm?
Yeah.
We've got to get some 18-year-old gal that's got a little learning.
So there's so much infrastructure that needs to be built. And I look at the concept of the frontier and I say, is the main thing that defines a frontier is basically the lack. We define it as openness, but could we also define it as the lack of human infrastructure?
Well, they got East Texas settled.
Yeah,
that was okay. Then they're over. Now they're over towards Central Texas, and then beyond to the hill country, and then beyond to the plains, and stuff. And so you have a succession of Texas frontiers, and Texas. And people forget this, but because of our immense size, we had a frontier longer. And that's kind of what I was talking about a moment ago with the lynching and the Indian fighting. We had a frontier longer than any other state or territory.
Yeah, crazy.
And so there were, the frontier conditions were over in East Texas, but boy, they weren't out in West Texas.
They're still not, in my opinion. I've been out there a few times. They're still not over. So, well, that's all the time we have for today. I appreciate you coming in, Bill, and
that's a pleasure.
We'll pick this up next week, and I just wanted to give a little bit more context, but we're going to get into I really want to get into the cattlemen and the sheep herders and the way that these different groups, how their own experiences and their own little wars that they had with one another. And so that's kind of what we'll look into.
My uncle's grandfather killed a cowboy. He was a sheep man, and he killed a cowboy on his ranch. It's a great story. We'll save it for next week.
All right. Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Bill.